Good morning. Is this on?
Yeah.
Awesome. Try to remember. I need your help. Keep me in this frame. Yeah. Well, I don't know what part I am in this series, but I've been laughing every week because I talked to Stephen about how I'm speaking as a part of a series, and I haven't heard one of the sermons because I'm always out with my daughter or something. I'm in kids' church or doing something. So I feel kind of disconnected from whatever has been said. I've heard bits from others around what's been said about soil, but I'm just going to bring what I got, and I hope it is a blessing to all of you to reflect in a new way on Jesus, and not so much. And when I looked at this parable, I was really struck by one thing that's consistent with all three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Every time this parable comes up, Jesus has something to say, and so we're going to look at that. My first slide is, I saw this t-shirt. I keep seeing it, I keep wanting to buy it, but I never buy it. But it has Jesus on it. It just has like a big picture of Jesus, and it says, "I never said that." And, I just feel like, man, I almost want to wear that shirt, but I always wear blank shirts because I'm not someone that wears shirts that say things, but I feel like that one's on the edge of like, oh, it might be worth wearing. But it is a joke because, it's kind of a double joke. Because one, it's like, I never said that, but the other interesting thing is that Jesus never says, I never said that. Even though he had plenty of opportunities to correct the story and correct people, even at the risk of his life, when they misrepresent him and say, he said this and he said that, with his life on the line, Jesus doesn't correct them. It's really fascinating when Jesus doesn't say something. I find it equally as fascinating as what he says. And that's a little bit of what we're going to talk about today, is looking at, yes, this is what Jesus said, but what did he not say, and why? Why does he not just say it? Have you guys ever, we'll just do show of hands. You can close your eyes so we don't judge each other, but have you ever just felt like, if that person could just hear this, if they just heard these things, then their problems would be gone, right? Anyone? No, yeah. Has anyone actually told somebody once, exactly what they needed to hear? You just laid it all out in front of them, maybe with your kids, or I might be guilty of that. I've told my kids everything they need to know and everything they need to hear. Anyone? Yeah. How'd that work? No. I don't normally hear that being a transformational moment in any of our lives. Sometimes, maybe it's the right thing at the right time, but usually that's a marker of a point in a relationship where you can never go back. Things were said. It's not that the things weren't true, but the problem is once they're said, you can never unsay them. It's like we know this deep down. When you start mentioning in this format, you go, oh yeah, that doesn't, but still, we watch, even looking at the news or looking at situations, we jump to, if they just knew, and if this, and you look at even the academic world and things I was just talking to Stephen because he's never in my sermons, so I told him what I was going to say because we were looking at the slides, and he was like, yeah, even in seminary, they're always telling us to make it clear, make your sermons point 1, point 2, point 3, make sure there's no room for misinterpretation, and yet Jesus is kind of never matches that in any of his speaking or anything. He absolutely never has a point where you go, wow, nobody could misunderstand that. I mean, even when he does say something clear, everyone misunderstands it. He lays it out a couple times to his disciples, and they just totally did not get it. Anyways, I'm gonna go into this, and I had I just made this up. I don't know if it's true or not, so we could decide later. You could say this isn't true, but I thought it sounded good. It sounds like a quote, but I was like, did I take this from somebody? I don't know. It says, the right answer at the right time can satisfy, but the right question at the right time can transform. And I think this is really interesting. A lot of times we are just looking for satisfaction. And it is quite satisfying at times when you do tell somebody exactly the right answer at the right time. But is satisfaction what we're after? And how long does it satisfy? Is it just a temporary satisfaction, or is there something even greater available in a moment than just? But those don't actually exist. We just put them there so we know which story it is, and we always call it the Good Samaritan. It's so interesting. It's like you're giving the answer before you read the story, and we go, oh, the Good Samaritan. But that's assuming the question, the story is meant to give you an answer, which if Jesus wanted to do that, he'd just say, love your neighbor. But, he would just say it. But he doesn't. He tells a story because a parable is asking a question. It's so much more powerful when you read that story. Jesus never calls the Samaritan good. Actually, nobody does in the story. But the question that's asked is, who am I in this story? That's a much more powerful question than what's the moral, what's the answer? You know what I mean? Because that's living. Every week I can ask that question and have a different answer. Who am I in the story about this Samaritan? And that it's not about, everyone knows the Samaritan did the right thing. The question that actually transforms me is, who am I in this story? And that story becomes a living story because it continually asks me that question. You get what I mean? The answer was satisfying. You go, oh, the Samaritan's good. I get the story. It's gone. It's out of my head. But the question actually lives on and continues to work on me. The interesting thing with parables is the teacher can't answer the question. Only the listener. Each of us and everyone around Jesus are the only ones that can answer this question that each parable is asking. You get what I mean? It's not a teacher asking a question to say, I know the answer, but I'm waiting for you to figure it out. It's actually only you that can answer the questions about who are you in the story. Does that make sense? Who am I in the story is one such question that opens up a very different reflection on a parable like the parable of the soils. It's not, what's the answer? Oh, I need to have good soil. It's like, no, who am I? Where am I? What does this mean for me? Those questions continue to do work in me, continue to take me further, open my eyes. So I'm going to read Jesus' answer after this parable. I'm not going to dive into the exact parable itself, but it's interesting to me whenever there's a repetition in the Gospels, it gets my attention because Mark wrote his Gospel first. Matthew basically copied it, but added a whole bunch of other references and scriptures and that extended stories. And then Luke writes a whole nother, he feels compelled. There's more to share about the good news of Jesus. And yet all three of them mention this parable and then mention Jesus' comments about the parable after. That is interesting to me. That tells me that these guys think this is very important. They don't think, oh, Mark already said that and Matthew already said that, so I can skip that and jump to whatever. No, this is like every one of them made sure they need this moment captured when they represent Jesus. So we're going to read, sorry, I'll turn around, it's too small down there. This is Mark's story of right after he tells this parable, the disciples say, what does it mean? And he replied, you are permitted to understand the secret of the kingdom of God, but I use parables for everything I say to outsiders so that the scriptures might be fulfilled. When they see what I do, they will learn nothing. When they hear what I say, they will not understand. Otherwise, they will turn to me and be forgiven." Then Jesus said to them, "If you can't understand the meaning of this parable, how will you understand all the other parables?" This is really fascinating. You cannot, according to Jesus, you cannot understand any other parable if you can't understand the parable of the soils. This is like the foundation on which all the other parables are to be understood. Matthew, I did Mark first because we want to read it in the order they were written. So now Matthew goes, "Oh, I need to tell this, but I'm going to tell it a little different." His disciples came to him and asked, "Why do you use parables when you talk to people?" He replied, "You are permitted to understand the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but others are not. To those who listen to my teaching, more understanding will be given, and they will have an abundance of knowledge. But for those who are not listening, even what little understanding they will have will be taken away from them. That is why I use these parables. For they look and they don't really see, they hear, they don't really listen or understand. This fulfills the prophecy in Isaiah that says, 'When you hear what I say, you will not understand. When you see what I do, you will not comprehend. For the hearts of these people are hardened, and their ears cannot hear, and they have closed their eyes, so their eyes cannot see, and their ears cannot hear, and their hearts cannot understand, and they cannot turn to me and let me heal them.'" Okay, there's a little bit extra in there. Well, Matthew felt to quote Isaiah and really lay this out here. Let's see what Luke says. His disciples asked him, "What is this parable meant?" He replied, "You are permitted to understand the secrets of the kingdom of God, but I use parables to teach to others so that the scripture might be fulfilled. When they look, they won't really see. When they hear, they won't understand." This is not the Jesus I grew up learning about. Does that make you uncomfortable, this verse? I used to skip over, you skip over the weird parts of Jesus that you go, that doesn't sound very nice. That's not, I don't know. So you just don't read it? I'm reading it today with you. I feel like this is so critical, and yet it almost is a parable in itself, because when you first look at it, you go, what? Like, Jesus is saying, if they actually knew what I was saying, then they would turn to me and be saved. Like, not that they would turn to me and I would have, that he would save them. Like, he's implying he doesn't want people to hear, understand, turn and be healed and saved. He's not implying it, actually, he said it directly. It's not an implication. Does that make you uncomfortable? I'm deeply uncomfortable with this. I grew up thinking this is it. Like, it's all about salvation, and everything just needs to be explained. I mean, that's our culture. It's our whole world is, you just gotta explain things, get your message, make it clear, get it out to as many people as possible. And Jesus is very clearly 3 times quoted as saying, I do this so that people don't see and don't hear and don't realize that they can just turn to me and be healed. I find this, it was so uncomfortable for me that I just had to keep looking at it and wrestling with it and asking for revelation. Because, let's see what I've got here. Salvation and healing seem to be secondary in Jesus' mind. Is that correct? Is that what you heard when you saw it? I wrote this slide, but do you agree that that's what it sounds like in this moment? There must be something more important to Jesus in this moment when he's speaking to crowds. There's something more important than people turning to him and being healed. He's not saying he won't do it. He's basically saying I would. If they turn to me and heal, if they turn to me, I would heal them. But he sees something more important than that. And therefore he thinks it's worth speaking in parables to get to something greater than just healing right now and salvation. Depending on the translation, and I'm not the expert on which word it is, but in Isaiah it says healed. Some people say saved, some versions say forgiven. I feel like the tension we feel is just almost like a glimpse into when you hear a real parable, like the way they would have heard it. You feel like this. You go, what on earth? And that's a good space to be as we like sit in the tension of what is Jesus trying to say? Jesus did not see it as loving to spell things out to those who aren't ready. And the verses in Isaiah that Jesus is quoting are about people who have such hard hearts, are so full of selfishness, that it would be unloving for them to realize that they could actually just turn to God and be healed. Can you see why that might be unloving? You know, see why that could be destructive to someone's life if they get a message of free healing and salvation without any change to their hearts. It's really powerful to think about, because I often think, we just got to get that. But in a sense, that actually Jesus seems to be saying there's something far greater to be tapped into. And once that happens, more will be given to you. But I thought of this question in the process of this, that when I see Jesus, he was so comfortable with being misunderstood. And I think about this, like, do I have anything to learn from Jesus' communication strategy? Or was that just for him back then? Like, was that just a thing Jesus did, and it was just for a time, but now we can spell things out clearly? But when I look at the way he lives and communicates, I'm so deeply challenged at his lack of trying to control people and force his message. In fact, the first major part of his ministry, he's constantly telling people to be quiet. He's like, don't tell anyone, don't tell anyone. He's very adamant for a huge part of his ministry. Don't tell anyone. And then the one time, I love this, talk about the right thing at the wrong time, or according to Jesus. The one time he tells someone to shut up. So do you guys know what it is? Who he tells to shut up? It's the someone possessed by a demon, and the demon says, "He is the Son of God." And Jesus says, "Be quiet." and very adamantly tells him to stop. And that's like, you would think that's the greatest thing you could declare. And yet, Jesus is like, absolutely not. That's not the time. Don't do it. This is not right. This is going to be bad. If you tell them the way it really is right now, this is bad. It's really fascinating when I look at this and I think, what does this mean for us in our lives, in our day-to-day? Where might it help my life to be open to walking in this path of how Jesus communicates? I can definitely say in parenting, I've not seen a lot of fruitfulness in spelling it out. I don't know about your kids, but it's like the more clear I make it, the more ridiculous the situation becomes. And there's something deeper going on in those situations with my kids. There's something deeper that needs to be communicated that even they are longing for. And it has nothing to do with what I'm trying to spell out, of what they need to do and how they need to do it. I could think of one example where I often get to one point where I finally just say, you need to say sorry to your sister, and they go, sorry, and then I'm like, oh, what do I do now? Because they did what I said, but that wasn't, it missed the whole point. This is what I see Jesus doing here when he's talking about the soils, when he's talking about parables, and he's saying, if I told you the answer, you would do it with the wrong heart, and it'd be like an apology screamed at the person in hate and bitterness. It destroys the very thing you'd be doing, and what's the point? And Jesus isn't interested in us getting to a point of saying what we need to say and doing what we need to do while our hearts are completely corrupted. I had a parable I want to share, I think that captures this a little bit. It's not a biblical parable, so apologize, you can throw it out if you don't like it. But I find it really captures a little bit of the heart of parables and opens up a deeper question. It's built on the story there's a story of a community on the coastline of Israel, and they hear of this great teacher, Jesus, and when they go and listen to him, they hear him say, when a Roman soldier asks you to carry his pack, carry it, don't just carry it for 1 mile as is required by the law, carry it for 2. And so they go home and they go, this is the mark of our faith, let's do this. And they start doing it, and they start to become known for their faith, and it lived out by the way that they carry these packs 2 miles. And the Roman soldiers even start to go through that region because they know there's this community that carries your pack for 2 miles, and they start to become friends with the community. And the community knows of their faith because of the way that they live out this mandate to carry the pack for 2 miles, and they see it as a great opportunity to suffer for their faith in Christ. Meanwhile, Jesus hears about this community, hears that they're taking the pack 2 miles and how they're doing it all. So he comes back through that region, and he gathers them, and he says, I see that you guys have totally misunderstood my first message, so I've come again to tell you a second message to clarify what you misunderstood in the first. He said, in your law, it says to carry a pack for 2 miles, but I tell you, carry it for 3. And this is if you're looking for an answer in this, you're going to be really frustrated with that story. What's the answer? What do you do? But if you look for a question, it opens up a deeper part of the teachings of Jesus, which is when you are counting the miles of what you do for your enemy or whatever, it's not love. It's not about 2 miles or 3 miles or anything. If they did 3, Jesus would say do it for 4. Because what does Jesus care about? Love. It's the heart. When you love, you don't count how many miles you're carrying something. It's not about that. If you love your enemy, you genuinely love them. It's not a record-keeping, earning, mark of our faith thing. It's just, I love you. See what I mean? That's a deeper, the parable takes it deeper than the answer. The answer isn't 2 miles, it's love. And when I see Jesus' parable on the soils and all of this, in all of his parables, it's questioning our hearts. That's the whole point. He says the soil is our heart. If you don't understand this parable, you can't understand any of my parables, because it's always about the heart. It's not about saying sorry to you or whatever. It's like, what's going on in your heart? And these are some of the things I'm challenged by as I look at this. Just some, but I said, God seems to be more comfortable with being misunderstood than I am. That's challenging. I find that very challenging. I want to check that in my life. Can I be more comfortable with being misunderstood? Or do I need to be understood? Do I need to clarify? Perhaps, I put a lot of perhaps. These are just, I don't know why. I felt like that was the right language for this. Perhaps it's not loving for me to spell it out clearly to someone else. Perhaps God's love is what stops God from telling me a lot of the things I need to hear. I think it is. In my journey, I really thought I had everything down when I was 18. And for some reason, God didn't tell me otherwise. It was loving of God that he didn't slap me across the face every day from all the days of my life, telling me all the things I'm missing. For some reason, God has had me on a different journey, a journey of grace and love that has opened my eyes to all the ways I've been missing it. I wonder if that's the same for you. Perhaps there's things today, God's grace is that he's not telling you. He's not slapping you in the face today. I find that fascinating and challenging. Perhaps I will find God's transformation in questions more than answers. I said, so today, what do you think is more important than you turning to him and for healing and salvation? I was reflecting on this and I thought about a critical moment. I think this is the next slide. Peter being asked the crucial question. This is so fascinating to me because I thought when I read this, and you read this parable of the sower, and he says, I've given you guys the permission to know the mysteries of the kingdom. It sounds to me like you guys get to know everything. You're on the inside. Everyone else is the bad soil. And I always viewed that for myself, like, well, I'm a believer, so I'm probably good soil. And I'm American, so I end up landing on the more confident side of things. But, when you do those personality tests, Americans always are willing to put 10 out of 10, but Aussies almost never. But, 7, even though it's your best number in the whole test. The crazy thing to me is when you look at the disciples, they were all of the soils for the whole rest of the story. That Jesus is saying, you don't have permission, I'll explain this to you, but what's the first one? The enemy steals it away. They didn't understand and it's stolen away. Jesus lost almost every disciple except for the 12 when he said, you gotta eat my flesh and drink my blood. Bam, everyone leaves him. And it's only the disciples left, and Peter says, where else are we gonna go? Powerful to see these disciples that have access, permitted to understand, they still had hard hearts, or they still did not understand. What's the next one? Rocky soil. When things get tough, they're out of there. Can you think of any disciple that didn't get out of there in the garden? And when Jesus is getting crucified, and Peter especially, denies him 3 times. Really fascinating. This is this rocky soil. These guys are supposed to have access to these mysteries, and yet here they're proven to be the rocky soil. What's the third one? Money. And obviously Judas displays the worst of that. But then you see, even with Peter, he goes back right when Jesus dies. Not only does he deny him and do all that, he goes back to trying to make money as a fisherman. And Jesus goes and meets him right where he's trying to make money and they're not catching anything. Says to put it on the other side of the boat, which is what Jesus did when he first met Peter and called Peter. He said, follow me. And Peter left all that. Now he's back. They catch 150 something fish. They almost break the nets. Peter, as soon as he realizes it's the Lord, dives out of the boat. He recognizes, I've been here before. We've caught a lot of fish before. I remember this. Comes back to the shore and has this exchange with Jesus and says, Jesus, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? This is the question I really need you to answer. It's only after this question that Peter is good soil. Isn't that fascinating? There's no readiness for multiplication or this gospel going out from Peter until after, do you love me, do you love me, do you love me? And then they wait till Pentecost, and then who's the guy that jumps up? Peter. He's willing to give up his life, he's totally in it for a different reason now. He's in it because he now loves, not because now I'm on the winning side. Before that, remember, Peter's always he's ready to get into it because he's thinking we're going to take over the Romans. He's got a lot of selfish interest in this journey with Jesus. He wants to be in there for all these other reasons, and now he's not in it for that anymore at all. And he becomes soil that is good soil. I find this so fascinating. I could list many people that go through that journey and of the disciples and all that, but I just find this so fascinating that the question it comes back to is, do you love me? And it's so powerful that Jesus, when he first shares this parable, he knows it's going to be years before these guys even begin to produce the fruit of this parable. And yet, Jesus did not rush that process. Years ahead of time. Watch them fall on their face, do all this stuff. He's not in a rush. He's not trying to spell it out for them, trying to force this process. He knows what they have to go through to get to good soil. And he walks with them with grace and love all the way to the point where this can happen. So that's what I have for today. I'm just going to, close in prayer. God, I thank you for your incredible grace to all of us, not just to these disciples in this moment with this parable, but all of your parables, all of the way you live brings questions to us that can transform. And thank you that your grace to us is that even when we totally are missing it, you don't rub that in our face. You still walk with us and work with us, and your grace is equally in what you say as well as what you don't say. God, I pray we would be like you in the way we show grace to others, and that we would walk in this way of parables and as acts of love to those in our lives, and ways to discover who you are. And God, I pray that this question, do you love me, would grow in each of us as a seed to produce fruit. Amen.